Hello, everybody. My name is Denisa Majlatova from SOS Electronic. I'd like to welcome you all in our webinar with 4D System Company. It's an Australian company specialized in graphic solutions for universal usage. I hope you all hear me well. In case you have any troubles during the webinar, please inform me by raising hands button or write us to chat or a Q&A button. We'll try to solve the problems. Our host for today is MarkkuRiihonen, Product and Business Development Manager in 4D Systems, who have prepared a presentation about smart widgets for you. In case you have any questions during the webinar, please write them down to Q&A. You can do it during the webinar anytime, and we will answer the questions after the presentation at the end of the webinar. And now, Markku, please, can you start your presentation?
Sure, thanks, Denisa. Good morning to everyone. As Denisa mentioned, my name is MarkkuRiihonen. I'm Product and Business Development Manager at 4D Systems. And today's presentation or webinar is about our software tools, 4D Workshop4 Integrated Development Environment, and more specifically the Pro version, and a new Smart Widget tool that we've built into the software. Just a second. So today what I will do is I'll give you just a brief introduction to 4D Systems, nothing long, and then a brief overview of the hardware solutions that we have available for integrating displays into applications. And then I'll give you a practical example of how to program one of our display modules, specifically in what's called VC Genie environment, and then using the new Smart Widgets editor that we've built into the integrated development environment. And at the end, I'll give you some knowledge resources, where to find more information online. And we will also give you the presentation, which has links to all the different assets that we have available. And at the end, I will also answer any questions that you may have. And if I cannot answer them right off the bat, what we'll do is we'll take down all the questions and then prepare a written answer paper also for you. So just briefly, what we do, if you don't know 4D Systems, we design and manufacture intelligent display modules in OLED and LCD technologies, and all of these have our custom graphics processor inside. And what we basically do is act as a one-stop shop for embedded display solutions. So we have a complete hardware and software solution for anyone requiring a touchscreen display or graphics display for their application, whether it's a new application or if it's about upgrading and replacing buttons with a touchscreen and a graphical user interface in an existing application, let's say like a coffee machine or something. And what our technology allows you to do is you can develop, quickly develop and integrate a GUI with touch functionality to virtually any application. And you can do this very quickly. So development time is just a couple of days or weeks instead of maybe, months or years when using a traditional approach into integrating a display into an application. And this essentially allows you to get your product out to market much faster than the traditional way of using a display. So what we have available is we have intelligent display modules, which usually act as either development tools or sub-assemblies into final applications. And we also offer the displays separately. So it's possible to also just order LCM or the LCD display alone. We have graphics controllers, and then we have the software development tools that are used to create your user interfaces with all of our display modules. And we have a wider range of these display modules, from really tiny thumbnail-sized OLED modules up to 7-inch TFT, LCD TFT modules. And these come in a variety of touch options, so non-touch, resistive touch, and capacitive touch. And everything's available as starter kits as well, or as development kits. And we also, if you're working with some of the major open source microcontroller platforms like Arduino or Raspberry Pi or BeagleBone, we also offer then hardware interfaces with kind of plug and play functionality to add a touch interface to those types of applications. And the latest series of display modules that we have available is the Gen 4 series. So this is our 4th generation of embedded display modules or intelligent display modules that we have available. And they look like this. All of these are available from SOS in their online store, or if you call there and a request for some. So just a few application examples. Our display modules are used in a wide range of applications like measurement devices, general purpose graphics, industrial control devices, coffee machines, drink dispensers, and so on. So there's a lot of applications utilizing this display technology because of its ease of use and ease of integration into an application. So really the core of today's presentation is to have a bit of a closer look at our software tools, and for the Workshop 4, the Pro version. And this is an application that is used to develop all the user application code for our display modules, and includes the editor, compiler, linker, and everything else you need to create a nice graphical user interface. And within this development environment, we have a number of sort of sub-development environments that cater for different user requirements and also different skill level. And this software is available as a free download on our website, and the Pro version is available at $79 and includes then lifetime updates once you purchase the license. And you don't have to purchase the Pro version without testing it. So we have a 7-day trial of the Pro available, and when you and this trial is for only the days that you use it. So if you use it one day and then don't use it for a week and use it the second day, only 2 days are counted in the trial. So as I mentioned, we have 4 different environments within the 4D Workshop 4, and they're called Designer, VC, Genie, and Serial. And the Designer environment is where you create your graphical user interface by writing a 4D GL or 4D graphics language code in its natural form. And this code is optimized for the Goldilocks, Picasso, and Diablo controllers that are embedded in our display modules. And the syntax is very similar to C, so there's no real need to learn a new language, or the learning curve is short and minimal. We then have also VC environment, which is more of a visual programming experience. On the right-hand side, you can see that it's got a what you see is what you get type mode, where you can design your graphics on a sort of drag and drop basis in the environment, and then it will generate the 4D GL code for you for the graphics. So you don't need to deal with that. And we have then sort of a more elaborate version of this called the VC Genie environment, where no coding is required at all. So everything is automated, and you drag and drop objects onto the display or the virtual display in the software, and then you define events for all the graphics. You know, what happens when you touch an area and so on. So the code is written for you automatically. And I'll demonstrate this particular environment in a little bit more detail for you today. But just to give you an indication of the power of this, we have one customer, for instance, BC and 3D Technologies, that makes the Sigma 3D printer. And they've generated the entire graphical user interface or user interface for their 3D printer in the VC Genie environment. And in fact, they share the entire project. The whole printer is open source and available on GitHub if you want to go and have a look how they've realized this. And then the last environment is a serial environment, which transforms the module into a serial slave, and you can then control it from any host micro with a serial port and control primitives and so forth on the display. But as mentioned, today we're sort of focusing more on the Smart Widget editor and the Genie environment. And the Smart Widget editor is something that allows you to create your own graphics and complex widgets on the display very easily. And you can have multiple layers within a widget. And then once you've created your own widget, whether it's a meter or a gauge or a knob or a slider or something, you can then use it in any of the other supported Workshop4 environments. So what we're going to do today, and how I'm going to demonstrate for you, is to show you how to create sort of a very simple prototype with our built-in widgets that are in the Workshop4 already built in, and then to show you how you can then sort of create your final design using Smart Widgets. So this is not a very complex application that I'm showing you, and the idea really is to show you the basics of what can be done, and then provide you with the knowledge resources or the documentation and the links to everything, so you can find out more and go and test for yourself. So what is needed for this is one of our Gen 4 starter kits, if you want to try this at your office or at home, and 40 Workshop4 IDE Pro installed. And for this example, I'm using the starter kit for the 3.5-inch capacitive touch Gen 4 module. This is the same module that's used in that printer that I showed you earlier. So I'm going to just change to the development software. I want to find it here, just a second, and share the software screen. So this is what, just double checking, I hope you can see what I'm doing. I suppose you can. Good. So this is what 40 Workshop4 looks like when you first open it. And the first thing we do is we create a new project in here. So I will click on create new project. And we have all of our different display modules built into this software. So in this case, we use the 3.5-inch capacitive touch model, which is the Gen 4 ULCD 35 DCT CLB. So I will select this one. And then we can also select what kind of orientation we want to develop in. So by just clicking on this display, we can choose what the orientation of the final user interface is. So in this case, I'm doing it in landscape format. And after that, I'll just click on next. And then we get to choose one of the environments in which we want to do our development. So as mentioned earlier, we'll be doing it in Genie today. So I will select the Genie environment. Okay, just need to move this around. So when you're in the Genie environment, on the left-hand side, you can see a simulated version of the display that we're building our graphical user interface in. At the top, you can find in the familiar Windows ribbon format a number of widgets that we have available. So there's a great...
Markku, I'm sorry, should we see it? Because we just see these 4 boxes like Designer, Genie, and Busy and Serial.
Yeah, you should be seeing it.
Can you try, please share the screen?
Okay, just a second. Share screen. Can you see it now?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I'll start over again. So once we're in the Genie development environment, on the left-hand side, you can see the simulated display that we're developing our graphical user interface in. At the top, we have the familiar from sort of Microsoft Office applications, the ribbon type menu, where we have a whole bunch of built-in widgets that you can use to create your prototype. So in Workshop4, these are called widgets or objects. And then here on the right-hand side, we have what's called Object Inspector. And this is where you can control the events that you assign to the different objects or widgets that you design into your graphical user interface. And you can also sort of modify the attributes of these different widgets. So if you remember what I showed you, what we're building in this particular case, we will put in a gauge. So this is done simply by finding the gauges tab here at the top, and then selecting the gauge that you want to use. So in this case, I'm going to use the cool gauge, and all I have to do is simply drag and drop it to the display area, and then I can give it a position on the display area as I like. So simple drag and drop action. And when I have this cool gauge object or widget selected, you can see that in the object inspector under the properties tab, I can modify the different attributes or parameters of this particular object. So you can change the color of it, or you can resize it, and that sort of thing. And I'm going to make a few modifications here for this application purpose. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that this, for this application, I want this to be 200 by 200 pixels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the height of this widget to 200 and press enter. And because it's a square type object, also the width of it is now 200 degrees. The second thing is I want to set the maximum value at 30. So I'm going to go to the maximum value of this particular scale, and I'm going to click on, type in 30, and now you can see that it automatically scaled from 1 to 30. So I'm done with this particular widget. Now we also want to put in an input device in here, or an input object. So I go to the input objects selection menu up here, and I will take this slider and drag and drop it onto the module or onto the display. And in this case, I'll do a bit of resizing so that it's easier to manipulate once it's programmed onto the display. And that should be okay. And what I want to do here also, I need to edit the properties of this a little bit, and I want to make the maximum value also 30, just like it is on the gauge here. So what I do is I just click on maximum value, type in 30 and click OK. And the last thing, what I want to do is I want to add some digits to this user interface. And I'm going to go to digits and then drag these LED digits onto the display. And since the values are going from 0 to 30, let's imagine this is some sort of injection system, or it's controlling some device where the values are from 0 to 30. I want to also display those as digits. Some people prefer digits rather than just a gauge. So I need to manipulate this a little bit. Now we have 4 digits in these digits, and we also have a decimal place. And I want to change it to just 2 and remove the decimal place. So first, I will edit the parameters here, the decimals, and put 0 in there and press enter. And now you can see that the decimal places have disappeared. And the second thing I want to do is I want to just change the digits from 4 to 2. So now I have 2 digits, and it looks a little bit quirky. So I need to kind of modify it a little bit to make it look a little bit better. So let's say like that. Okay. So now we have the layout of our user interface completed. So the next step is to connect or assign events to all of these objects that I have here. And remember, I'm just creating a prototype right now. So it's kind of a very quickly slapped together type example. But to connect these objects to each other, so when it's programmed to a display module and you drag along with the slider, all these other objects will react to it as well. And the way you do it is you click on the object, or you select it, and then here in the object inspector under the events tab, you can assign events to this particular object when you interact with it. So in this case, we have 2 options. We can select what happens when you move the slider and then let go. What is the display module going to do? And the other one is what happens when it's moving, when you keep sliding it up and down. what is the action that it takes. So the first event is the on change. What's it going to do? So what we have to do is highlight this bar here next to on changed, and then click on these three dots here on the right hand side. And what will happen is that it opens an on event selection pane. And here I can see all the different actions that I can assign to this, or events that I can assign to this specific object. And what I'm going to tell it to do is report the message. And what that means is that it's going to send a serial command to a host controller interfaced with the display module. So essentially, setting a temperature on a thermostat or some other type of message or some other type of functionality. And I will click OK, and I've assigned that. And then when I'm dragging up and down on this slider, I want this gauge to go up and down, and also these digits to go from 0 to 30. So what I'm going to do is, when I'm changing it, highlight this row and go to the three dots again to open the event selection pane. And I'm going to assign this slider to control the cool gauge object. And it's as simple as selecting it and clicking on OK. And the last thing I want to do is daisy chain this gauge to the LED digits here. So the way I do that is I just select the cool gauge, and under the events option, I have just one available event that I can assign to it. And I'll open the event selection pane again and set it to control the LED digits. And then I click on OK. And essentially now I've completed my user interface. So now the next step is to program it to the module I have here. So the first thing I need to do is save the project before you can program anything. So I will put it here, and I'll call this demo, and click on save. And so I'll attempt to show what I have here on my desk. I hopefully everybody sees my camera. Do let me know if you don't. But here we have the 3.5-inch display module. I've connected it to my computer using an FBC cable that's supplied with every module, and one of our programming adapters, and then a micro USB cable. And when I power it up, let's see which way it is. It just takes a little while to power up. So what the module looks like when it comes from the factory is you've got a standard splash screen on it. And now we're going to program it. So the way that that's done is simply by clicking on this build copy load button, and it will compile the program and then program the display module. So I'll click on it. One thing I need to do first is to make sure that I've got the correct COM port selected from this COMS tab up here. And then I'll click on copy, build, and load. And it compiles the program and then asks you to put the graphical elements on a micro SD card, which I already have plugged into my computer. And I just click on OK. And now the final programming has been done. So the next step for me to do is to just take my the micro SD card from the computer and put it in to the display module. And then close it. And there's my graphical user interface. So when I interact with the slider, the gauge goes up and down in the equivalent values. And also the numbers. Am I showing this upside down? No, looks reversed to me, but anyway.
It's okay. It's okay. We see it correctly.
Okay, so you get the point. So this is how you can create a very quick prototype. Now, then the next thing to do is, let's say this gets approved and you want to, make the graphics look better, and you have your own idea of how to of what you want it to look like. Then the next step is to use the Smart Widgets tool. So for for demonstration purposes in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a second page or second form, as we call them in Workshop 4, to demonstrate this part. So what I'm going to do is go to Systems and Media, and then click on this button where you can add a new form to the display, and I'll click on that. And that means I have a second page here now where I can create a second layout or maybe even second prototype layout. But for this case, we're just going to use this to create the same interface we just did, but with the Smart Widgets editor. The one thing I will do though is go to the first form here and put in a button that allows me to go to the next page or to the next kind of user interface selection within this application. So I'm going to use this, what we call a fancy button or win button, and I'm going to drag it onto the display, and I'll make it a little bit bigger so that it shows up a little bit better on the display. And I can also modify this as I wish. So I'm going to make a few changes. First of all, I don't really like the gray color, so I'm going to change the color from the properties in the object inspector to this golden color, so it's nice and visible. And the second, I want to change the caption here to state next page. So what I'm going to do is click on this caption option here and simply type in next page. Press enter, and it's there. And the last thing is just want to change the fonts a little bit, make it bold and a little bit more visible. And I can also do that from the properties. So I'm going to make this bold, and I'm going to make it 10 points in size. So now the button is more visible. And for this button, so that it moves to the next page when it's programmed into the display module, I can go to the event selection in the object inspector, and on changed, i.e. when I'm interacting with the button, I can tell it to activate form 1 in the graphical user interface, and I'll click OK. So now that part of the programming has been done. Now to design to use the smart objects, Smart Widgets tool, I go to form 1, and we'll start off with making our own gauge. So let's say I've created a gauge that I've done it, made it in Photoshop or some other imaging software, and I have a nice base layer for it. The first thing I do is I go to gauges here, and when you have the Pro version of Workshop 4 activated, you have this Smart Gauge option under gauges, and I just click on that and drag and drop it onto the display. And right now you can't see anything, but I'm putting it here on the layout of my graphical user interface. And then under properties, when I have that Smart Gauge selected, we have this config option here. And what I do here is just highlight it and then click on these 3 buttons here. And what happens is it opens up the Smart Widgets editor. So at first this may look a little bit confusing, or there's a lot of things that you can do here. I'm going to show you just a few things that you can do here, a simple example. And then we have a lot of documentation available to run you through all the different options that are available here and how to work with them. But the first step of starting to build a smart widget is to put in a base image. And in this case, what I'm going to do is, the way you do this is you go here at the top and select this three dotted button, and it'll open up a dialog box to find your assets. And I've prepared already a gauge backplate that I want to use for this particular widget, and it's been created in the size of 200 × 200 pixels. I click on open, and there it is. There's my smart widget. So I'm changing, instead of using the built-in widget that was in or built-in gauge that's in Workshop 4 already, I'm creating my custom one. So that's the first step. I've got now a base layer that I can then start working on. So the next step, what we're going to do is we're going to add a needle on top. And that's done by going to layer 1 here at the top, and then enabling that layer and adding and deciding whether it's going to be above this base layer or below the base layer. In this case, we'll choose for it to be above the base layer. And I click on these 3 dots here to find my image. And I already have a 200 by 200 pixel needle image prepared for this. And I'll click on open and OK. And there we have the needle on top of the gauge. So if I make it below, it'll disappear because it's below this layer. And now it's above the layer. And I can also enable and disable this particular layer. So that's the first thing. And I've got the needle right on top of the base layer. Right now, the way that Workshop, what you're going to do, what we want to do with this needle is set different frames and states and rotate this particular image on top of the base layer. And by default, this is a little bit difficult to explain in this context, but by default, if you imagine the needle image here is a square where the top top left-hand corner is the default area by which the image would be rotated. So we first have to decide or define an actual reference point for this particular rotation point. And what we're going to do is put it in the center of that particular layer. So this image is 200 pixels times 200 pixels. So the center would be 100. So what I'm 100 in X and Y coordinates. So I could type that in here or just click on center. And now my image has disappeared because it's actually up here, the reference point. So the next step I need to do is move the needle back to the center on top of this base layer. And that's also done by centering the X and Y coordinates. So I'll just click here on 100, 100, and so on. But normally you can manipulate these numbers as you wish. So I can, for example, move the needle up or anywhere else I like, but I'll make it center for now. And once we've done that, we need to define minimum and maximum degrees for this particular layer that's on top of this base layer. So I could, for example, type in here -45, and you can see that the needle has moved here, and this would be the minimum angle that you can have for this needle when you're finished with the object. But in this case, I'll make it 0. The maximum angle, however, needs to be at 30, and this is being measured at 300 degrees. So I will make the maximum 300 degrees in this case. And so I'm completed with that one. The last thing to do for us is to decide what are the minimum and maximum values, or let's say states, of this particular object. And in this case, the minimum value would be 0. And if you remember from the original example, we want the maximum value to be 30. Just like here, this number is 30, and all the increments in between are always, is 10 increments per 10 digits. So I will make this 30 here. And now if everything's going correct, we should be able to see the rotation of the needle. And you can see that there's 31 frames altogether, and our custom gauge is now complete. So the last thing what we can do also here is we can add what's called a numeric part onto the display. So make it be a little bit more visual, just like we had with the LED digits in the previous example. I'll click on this, enable, and I can see a numerical value here. So when I'm moving the frames up and down, the value goes up and down. But rather than have it up here, I'd like to place it here in the middle on top of the base layer. And that's done by manipulating these X and Y coordinates. So from top and then from the left-hand side, how many pixels towards the bottom and how many pixels to the right. You can, of course, always also do this by typing in the numbers, but I'm using this method just to show you for the sake of argument. The second thing is I'd like, because the numbers are going from 0 to 30, I like to make these two numbers. So the way I can manipulate that is by typing in just a 0 here. And it's also possible to add some text in here, like fuel flow. So in this case, the 0 numbers would be the variables. And then this is a static piece of text in there, but I will remove it, but just wanted to show you that that's possible. And then the last thing I want to do with this particular feature is change the color to something that blends in better with the gauge. So I'll click on this, and now it's a bit more gray. So now my widget is completed. I'm happy with it. So the last step I need to do is just click on OK. So there's my new Smart Widget. It looks quite a bit nicer than the built-in widget, if we want to compare them. So that's the first step is to create this gauge. The next step is then to create a slider, a smart slider. So if you remember, we had a slider like this, kind of looking like a little bit like primitives or something else. So we want to make something a little bit more fancy. So I'll go here again, and we can find this under inputs at the top here. And we have here the smart slider widget. So I'm going to drag and drop this onto the screen and then put it here in the same place where it was before. And like with all the other smart objects, under properties, what we do is we have to go to this config menu and then click on these three dots here on the right-hand side to start off the smart widget editor. So in this case, we can't, it's actually placed here, but we can't see it yet because we need to put a base layer on it. So what I'm going to do is, again, as with previous widget, I'm going to go to the base image and click here on these things. And I've prepared already in advance my base layer, which is here. And I'm going to click on open. And there it is. There's my kind of slider base layer. So the next step I need to do is add a first layer on top. And what I want to do is place it above this, this base layer. And I can find it by clicking on this button and clicking on add. And I have this little kind of slider button that looks more like a real world kind of toggle button. And I'll add it on top and click on OK. And now you can see that the button is sort of offset a little bit. So we need to center it onto this onto this slider path, or what you call the base layer. And the way that we do that is we need to do minimum and maximum values for in the x-axis. And in this case, I've already looked through this, and the pixels I need to move it to the right is 41 pixels. And I also want to make sure that it doesn't move anywhere else, so it'll always stay horizontally in that particular position. And if I want to create the frames that move the thumb vertically, as in when you're using the widget, I need to set also minimum and maximum values for in the Y position. And in this case, I've already tested this before. The minimum value in this case is 255, which is here at the bottom. And then the maximum value is 10. So it doesn't go above or beyond this particular spot here at the top. And then last thing that I want to do is set the minimum and maximum values for this object. And since we're going to control this gauge with it, I want the maximum value also to be 30. So we've got that done now. Let's see if it works already. So this is how the gauge would be working right now, or this slider would be working right now. But I want to make it a little bit more fancier. So what I will do, one last thing that I will do is add one more layer. And this time I need to enable the layer, and this time I'm going to put it below the base layer. And that's, so I select below and then go and find my image. and I look for the image, and here is this slider background that I want to add. I click on open, and it's added. And right now it's just there, kind of behind. So if I make it above, let's say, there it is. I'll put it below, and I also have to center this one. So what I need to do here is then also set the x coordinates correctly, which in this case is just a second. I think it was 41 or 53. You have to check. So let's make it 53, like this, and also want to make the maximum 53. So now we have it centered. The second thing what we have to do is set its minimum and maximum values in y-axis. In this case, I've already checked this out, and it's -245, and I've completed the settings for that particular layer. The last thing I need to do is make sure that when I'm moving these layers, you can see that the other one's not, the layer below is not moving together with the toggle yet. So I have to set also the maximum value here to be 30. And when I move them around, you can see that it's not quite working. So the last thing I need to do is link these so that they move smoothly together. So I click on linked group here. And now it should be working properly. So there we go. I've basically now completed the slider. So, and I'm happy with this. So I'll click on OK. And now I can move these widgets anywhere I want on the screen if I want to move them around. The last setting when it comes down to the slider is just do some fine tuning on the touch surface. So I need to put some offset into the extremes so that when you're touching this, it's not only a small part of this particular object, but it covers the entire button here. And that's done by setting these offset values here in the properties under Object Inspector. And in this case, the values are 38 pixels and 38 pixels at the top and the bottom. And now, basically, this particular object is completed. So the final step is to then connect all these objects together and program them into the display module. So what I'll do quickly is I'll add the digits just for the sake of argument, just like I did before. So I'm going to add some digits here. I'm going to remove the decimal places like I did before and just make it two digits, and then modify it a little bit. And then what I will also do is I will add that button to get on the previous page. So I'll click here, and I'm going to write a new caption here. Previous page. Click OK. I'm going to change the color to that bright yellow, so it's kind of more prominent on the display. Click OK. And I will also make the font bigger and bold, so I'll make it 10 points. And now it's a little bit easier to see. So the last step then in this particular case is to assign events to all of these objects. So just like we did before, exactly the same thing. I highlight the slider. I go to the Object Inspector here and the Events window, and I assign onChanged to report a message. And then on changing, I'm going to tell it to control the smart gauge in form 1, which is what we're operating right now. So I select the smart gauge, and that event has been assigned. And then I highlight the smart gauge. I go to onChanged and make it control in the event selection pane, I'll make it control the LED digits one set, which is in form 1, and click OK. And then last thing, what I'll do is assign a function or event to this button, and I want it to go to the previous page, or let's say to form 0. So again, I go to the Object Inspector. Under the events, I select onChanged, and in the event selection pane, I tell it to activate form 0 and click OK. And now my graphical user interface is complete. So let's say we're imagining again, that this was a quick prototype, and then we wanted to go and prepare our own graphics where it looks fancier. So we've prepared this one using the Smart Widget editor. So the last step to do then is to program this into the module. So first thing is always to save your project. And then I'm starting my video again. So here's my user interface. I'm going to power down the module, take out the SD card, and put it in my computer. And hopefully there's no SD card problems. No, that's good. And then I will start programming the module. Just a second. There we go. And then I just click on build, copy, and load. Oh, right. I need to have the module on, obviously. So I'll find the right COM port. And there it is. And then build, copy, and load. And now it's programming the module. And then it asks me to put the SD card and put the assets onto the SD card. So I click on OK. Now it's copying everything to the SD card and programming the module. Everything was successful. And now you can perhaps see that it's here asking, stating that the drive is not mounted, which means it's searching for the graphics assets from the SD card. So what I'll do is I'll put the SD card back into the module. And then I'll power up the module. And now you can see here that in this new interface, we've got this button here for the next page. This is still functioning like it was before. And then if we want to see the other one, we just click on this and it takes me to the next page. And here we've got our Smart Widget. So let's say our finished user interface. And I can go back to the previous page whenever I want to. So that's the way to use Smart Widgets. The one last thing that I want to show you or show everyone is how this communicates with the external devices, or when it's sending messages or reporting messages to outside devices. So the way that this is done is, if you remember, with this particular widget, for example, I set the onChanged event to report a message to the outside world or to an external device. And the way that you can test this and look at it sort of more visually, what it's sending, is that under this tools menu here, we have what's called Genie test tool. And when I open this, oh, oops, just a second, connect. Can you see my screen, what's on the screen right now?
Yes, I see the Genie test executor. Yeah.
Okay, great, good. So, because it kind of opens a separate window, so I'm not sure how it works with the webinar software. But in this case, what we can see here is all the different elements that we have on the display. So here you can see all the different active forms. So form 0 or form 1. We have the cool gauge, we've got the slider and the LED digits and so on. And what this does is that on the right-hand side, you can see all the different serial commands that it would be sending to your host device. So for example, when I'm dragging and letting go of this, this slider here, then you can see what it's doing on the right-hand side pane on my shared screen. So these would be the bits and bytes that it sends to your host controller, and your host controller can then interpret these the way that you need it to interpret to set values to something or control an external device. Or if you want to send, let's say, from your host and tell it to show form 1, the first page on this user interface, what you can do is click on form 0 here. And this string would be what you need to send to the display from your host for it to set show page 1 here. Or if you want to show a value like let's say, if you want to show 60 degrees or let's say 25 degrees on the LED digits here, the way you can see what you should be sending is by going to the LED digits here and type in 25 and click on set. And that's the string you need to send. And you can see that the display has 25 showing on it. So that's basically everything in a brief nutshell. So, and it's quite easy to do and quite fast to learn. And then when you kind of have the main idea working for you, then it's easy for you to go and prepare a lot of your custom widgets and so on. And the thing is, what you previously had to do without the Smart Widgets editor, you would have to create all of this, everything in Photoshop, all the different iterations and go about that. But now, if you want to change the background of the gauge, all you have to do is go to the Smart Widgets editor and then replace the base layer with whatever option or alternative background that you wish to have. So that's that. Just going back to the PowerPoint. So that's the Smart Widgets editor. And that's sort of the basic functionality of how it works. And what we have available then is a lot of different knowledge resources for this particular functionality for Workshop 4 and for all of our products. So we have data sheets for everything. We have hundreds of application notes for beginners and advanced users, which you can find on our website and search based on what you're looking for. We have lots of YouTube videos on our YouTube channel. We have a very active user forum where you can seek for advice if you're stuck with something. And you can, of course, also always contact our technical support. And one thing I've forgotten to put in this, which I will add to the slides later, is we have a group of engineers called 4D makers who make a lot of projects using our display modules. And those projects are also shared on a specialized website with full project write-ups, code examples, and everything else you might need to replicate those projects. And last but not least, we have lots of different application notes ready for the Smart Widgets editors. I've prepared a list of links to some of the more notable ones that you can use for learning when you want to start using the Smart Widgets editor and Workshop 4 Pro. And that's pretty much everything I had to say. So if there's any questions or something's unclear, please feel free to ask now. If I cannot answer right now, then I'll take down the questions and then answer afterwards.
Okay, for now, I have one question, because I think you mentioned at the beginning that this Pro version of 4D Workshop, it's sort of free for a couple of days, and it can be, I don't know, downloaded or really how they can get to, how they can get this for Pro version.
Okay, so the Pro version is available from SOS, for example. Mm-hmm. So it's possible for you to first of all, you can download the software from our website. And then if you want to then buy a license, you can get in touch with SOS, for instance, and purchase a license. And the way that the licensing works right now is that once you've installed the Workshop 4 on your computer, you can, I'll show it to you actually now. I'll share my screen. Share. And I'll show you Workshop 4. I'm just trying to find it right now. Where is Workshop 4? Maybe it's here. No. Just a second. Mm-hmm. Show all windows. Here we go. Share screen. So in Workshop 4, if you can look at my screen,
see Smart Widget Editor yet.
Can you see it?
Only Smart Widget Editor application node. I think this is the last page of the presentation.
Okay, then let me resume share.
Share. Mm-hmm.
Can you see now?
Not yet.
Okay, let me try it. Is it share screen?
Okay, see. Mm-hmm.
So you can see Workshop 4.
Yep.
Okay. So the way that you can get a license then through SOS is you order it, and then once you paid, all we need to receive from you is under options, we have a license tab here at the top, and here's a serial number that's unique to every computer where it's installed. So when we get a serial number and your email address and you place an order, then we'll send you a password for the or license key, which you can enter here, and then you have the full features available of the Pro version.
Okay. I see one question. I don't know if you can see it also. Yeah. The question is, what's the difference between free and Pro?
Okay. So the free version, or let's say the Pro version, includes the Smart Widgets editor, which is not part of the Pro version. And also then the Pro version includes some additional features that are, well, they're a little bit difficult to explain unless I go on for a long time, right? It adds what's called Genie magic to the Visit Genie editor, which allows you to add some 40GL code snippets into these widgets in addition to adding the events. So you get maybe a little bit more robust experience, but it's relatively advanced in the beginning. And then in the future also with Pro version, when we come up with some additional new features with the Pro, if you purchase the license, you get the lifetime updates on all those features. So if we put in an improved debugger or something else, those are usually then part of the Pro version.
Okay. Since I do not see more questions, so I have one. This presentation, will you send it over to us so we can have also the links?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can, if you want to put it on your
yeah, for example, to website so the people can check also the web links. What I saw that you have on the last page of the presentation. So maybe this one. And one more question. Do we get the lifetime updates by buying Pro?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So if you have any questions, please feel free. Since I do not see any more, so I'd like to thank you, Markku, for the valued information and detailed presentation. And also I'd like to thank you all who arrived and stayed with us during the presentation. In next month, we will plan more webinars. We will spread the word on social media and also on our web pages, and please follow us. And I wish you all a pleasant and successful day, and goodbye.
Thanks, Denisa.
Thank you.
Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you, Markku. Bye-bye.
Bye.